Good afternoon. I'm Łukasz Juszczyn, and I'm the head of the Polish Institute of International Affairs Brussels office. And I would like to welcome all of you, in particular our panelists, our experts, participants, and the general public, to our debate on the European External Action Service, its mission up to now, and on the prospects for the future in this demanding, challenging, very extremely dynamic geopolitical landscape. So before giving the floor to Patricia Sasna, who is at PISM our director of research, I would like to express my great gratitude to our partners, co-organizers of our today's debate, the Center for European Policy Studies and the Swedish Institute for European Policy Studies. Thank you so much for this smooth and fruitful cooperation. I think that we well stated that our recent reports on the service are complementary, and that will be also occasions to continue our discussions. I hope that because this is the first occasion for our cooperation at the Brussels level, so I hope that there will be follow-ups regarding the structure of our today's debate. For the representatives of the mentioned institutes. So we're going to have Steven Dokmans, the director of CEPS. We're going to have Christoph Hillion, senior research fellow of CIEPS, who will present the first of today's report. And then we're going to move to the second report, the report produced by PIS. So Bartłomiej Znojek and Elżbieta Kaca, they will explore key findings and recommendations regarding our report. And then we'll have a great opportunity to listen, to hear Mrs. Belen Martinez-Carbonell's remarks, reactions. She's a director of human resources at the service. So it's a really huge honor for us, Ms. Martinez-Carbonell, to have you with us on this debate. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation. And also, I would like to thanks to our participants who are invited to make their comments, ask questions during the Q&A session that will be in the end. So I encourage you, and I promise that we're gonna spare as much time as we can, about 30 minutes for the discussions. So let's move with our agenda. So Patricia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Łukasz. Thanks and welcome to our debate. I feel sort of like a part host of this debate. I just want to say that it's great to see familiar faces around the table, not only my colleagues at PISM, but also Stephen and Christoph and Ms. Martinez-Carbonell, whom I look forward to listening to. So I just want to, I don't want to make it a courtesy opening. I just want to really stress that this debate on the European External Action Service is timely for at least two reasons. Firstly, as the EEAS turns 10, it is a perfect moment to look back at how it evolved. The service has now more than 3,100 statutory staff. It manages almost 150 delegations and 17 civilian and military missions and operations around the world. And it's obviously responsible for institutionalizing EU relations with partners and working on enhancing the EU's voice and stature globally. Secondly, the EU has just agreed to launch the Conference on the Future of Europe, which will reflect on the medium to long-term prospects for the EU. It will debate what reforms are needed to improve its policies and institutions. So strengthening EU's role in foreign affairs, of course, is part of this initiative, and the concept of EU strategic autonomy is currently debated and being implemented by member states. So it is evident that a solid EU diplomacy should be an essential part of this stronger and more integrated, hopefully, union. Now, the question how to strengthen EU's voice globally is vital given such worrying trends in international affairs as the increased nationalisms and authoritarianisms, persistent conflicts and humanitarian crises, questioning of the rules-based world order, especially, of course, in the context of the rivalry between the US and China. The rise of politically motivated disinformation campaigns initiated by China and Russia in the EU is also worrisome and needs to be addressed. So this context, I believe, begs the following questions. Is the EU diplomacy capable of impacting worldwide politics? What challenges should be addressed to strengthen the EEAS, and how to engage all EU member states in building the service? So we will look for answers to these questions, referring to two valuable reports, like Łukasz said, which describe the challenges and assess outcomes from the EEAS development until now. The first report, SEPS and SEEPS report, focuses on analyzing the role of EEAS in terms of coordinating the external affairs, policy initiation and representation, while PISM report offers an in-depth analysis of EEAS appointment policy, of its administrative staff in 2011-2019. All three our think tanks have had significant record, I believe, in fostering the debate on EEAS from the very beginning. In the past, SEPS and SEEPS published a very well received and widely distributed legal commentary on the Council decision establishing the EEAS in 2010 and a set of recommendations to amend it. At PISM, on the other hand, we looked mainly at EEAS appointment policy. We had our first report on that published in 2011, and it did trigger a lively discussion. So with that, I thank you for being here and invite the speakers to take the floor. I look forward with extreme interest to our debate.
Yeah, maybe before giving the floor to the first reporters, the first authors, one technical remark to our participants. So in order to ask your questions, please leave it in Q&A Zoom window that could be very clearly visible to our panelists and to myself, and to not put it in a more general chat. Yeah, and for the reporters, maybe it will be particularly interesting to hear your recommendations, namely taking advantage of Ms. Martinez Carbonell's presence. So the floor is yours. Christoph, Steven, please.
Thank you, Łukasz. Christoph and I, we have agreed that I would present a report because his line is a bit shaky and therefore more suited for short interventions, perhaps during the Q&A. But I speak firmly for our two, not just two, but three institutes. The Friedrich Ebert Stiftung was very much on board with us as well. But let me just say, Patricia and Łukasz, how great it is to see you all here as well. If only we could have a group hug. Maybe there's a virtual emoticon for that, I don't know. We'll have to find that. I'll be cursory, perhaps telegraphic in the presentation of a report. And I will start by saying what it is not. It is not a review of external action of the European Union in substantive policy terms. It is very much a review on the role of the the European External Action Service as a protagonist, an actor on the stage of that is otherwise occupied by other institutions and members of the wider EU foreign policy family. So it's very much institutional in nature, procedural, if you want. And 10 years on, indeed, the 10th anniversary, happy birthday, by the way, presents an opportunity to reassess the Lisbon system as it was created. And I think it immediately comes with a marker that we have to put down, and that is that the European External Action Service obviously operates in a field which is determined in legal terms, and which bears the defects still. We see that on our television screens almost on a daily basis, it seems, these days. The defects in the original design, some of which are very hard to fix, are ingrained in the treaties. The legal dichotomy between the CFSP, Common Foreign and Security Policy, in the Treaty on the European Union and all other policy areas covered by the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, each with their own decision-making processes and institutional peculiarities, hamper, of course, the full role that the European External Action Service is perhaps expected to play, but cannot. And so this is a caveat that is worth observing from the outset. Second point is that, of course, EU member states primarily shape EU foreign policy. They do so together with the EU institutions in the realm that the institutions are competent to act, of course. But there too, it's obvious for any Brussels watcher, to see that they have difficulties to set aside their differences and focus on the common interest. A third general remark, which is, I think, worth making, is that the nature of diplomacy is changing writ large. It does not affect only the European External Action Service, it's very much also part and parcel of the functioning of ministries of foreign affairs, who see some of their foreign policy role being taken over by prime ministers' offices, by finance ministries, you name it. And so the traditional coordinating role of diplomats is changing, also a result, of course, of digital trends, etc. So the EEAS is not alone in this, but it does suffer from, it seems still 10 years on, from a lack of buy-in of member states, as well as other parts of the EU administration, in playing a fully fledged role. And we'll come back to that in a second. I should also state that our report is, of course, trying to add value to what's already out there. That there's a raft of existing ideas of new initiatives, going back to the Meseberg Declaration, the Copenhagen 9 policy paper, the Strategic Compass, the EEAS's own internal review process. So ours is very much an independent view, with people in the know, some anciens combattants, some external observers, member state representatives, etc. So we try to balance the backgrounds as well as geographical location and perspectives in this report, gender balance, of course, as well, and very much also the member states' headquarters and own embassy perspectives. Now, that is as far as the contextualization is concerned. As far as the main findings of the report, I think there are really only two. One is that the EEAS's value added is really to provide innovative responses to fast evolving demands, as you alluded to, Lukáš, and distill a sort of distinct European brand of diplomacy, which entails that the EEAS has a capacity to pioneer, but also infuse in all EU policies a strategic vision and the political, geopolitical direction that will increase the EU's influence on global developments. And the hitherto indeterminate nature of the EEAS's political mission, which is not given in the Council decision, which is not given in the 2016 Global Strategy, that might play to its advantage, you could say, by making it easier for it to adapt to and to deliver on new expectations. The question is, however, whether a sense of mission, a sense of purpose ought to be given to the European External Action Service in political terms. The second main finding is that there's a need to reap the benefits, really, of the EEAS's core assets. And Here, this requires more initiative, and the task force finds from the HRVP and the European External Action Service at large, more trust also from the other protagonists of the EU foreign policy family, and better coordination with its key interlocutors, particularly the European Commission and the member states, as well as a better use at the EEAS's, indeed the European Union's disposal. Here we refer to the hybrid character essentially, but also the structural dependence of the European Action Service on other protagonists, which, though a handicap in forging its own identity and esprit de corps, indeed offer opportunities also to exert thought leadership and build coherence across the entire EU foreign policy machinery. And this, it is thought, in turn, should bolster the service's ability to support the HRVP in representing a sort of whole of Europe approach to the world. So these are the two main findings: the need to reappraise the EEAS's purpose, and secondly, to reap the benefits of the core assets within the European Action Service. And so, Lukáš, as you pushed us to formulate some recommendations, let me devote the rest of my time to those recommendations. Already alluded to them in passing, but the European External Action Service itself should, we think, do four things in particular. One, pool its vast in-house expertise. Two, produce its own brand of non-papers. Three, provide cognitive input and technical support to other EU stakeholders. And four, encourage information sharing across the EU external action system. This does not sound very innovative, you will say, but many difficulties still exist at each of those levels. For example, I mean, to better pool the in-house expertise provided by the different strands of the service's officials, which hail from EU institutions, Commission, or our seconded national diplomats, or our seconded national experts, these can help contextualize the different stakeholders, EU family members' perspectives in shaping the EEAS's own initiatives, and thereby cultivate the ownership of EU foreign policy in general, is the thinking. And of course, ownership into the European External Action Service itself. There's an idea of expanding smart mobility, for example, between the service and national foreign ministries, where the time spent by national diplomats in the European External Action Service should be better valued also in their home service. The idea of producing its own brand of non-papers would stimulate discussion, potentially leading to joint communications with the European Commission. Providing more cognitive input and technical support, especially for the European Council President, it is believed, because that is where, in the European Council at least, where the High Representative is the only foreign minister, so to speak, around the table, who can help engineer the political capital at leaders' level, which can then be channeled down the entire column of EU foreign policy making and embolden the European Action Service. Let me turn to the second cluster of recommendations, which focuses on the European Action Service and the European Commission. Here, the idea is threefold. One, to really strengthen much more the integrated approach between foreign policy per se and all other policies with an external dimension, notably through the work of a reinvigorated group, EXCO group, that supports the college within the European Commission. Two, to avoid duplication in expertise, but also encourage inter-service mobility in that sense, and flexibility in the allocation of tasks, especially at EU delegations level. And that flexibility of pen holdership in a way would facilitate or would break silos which still, to a large extent, define parts of the House. And three, collaborate more closely even more closely than is happening now in the allocation of funding or in the reallocation of funding if political interests, geopolitical interests, and change. We can elaborate on these points in the discussion, but finally, let me say a few words what the European External Action Service should do in support of the HRVP, where the HRVP has a lot of room for initiative still to take in a way. One would be the initiation of policies covering the entire spectrum of EU external action, with the support, of course, and in cooperation with the European Commission services. At the moment, it seems that there are certain chasse gardée which dare not be trespassed upon in terms of boundaries. This is obviously not facilitating a coherent and integrated approach to EU external action writ large. Secondly, make more active use of the High Representative's power of initiative and lead through the Council machinery. I spoke about engineering political capital at the European Council level, and that is one idea, for example, of making sure that the HR is requested by the leaders to submit initiatives, potentially leading then to decisions taken by the European Council, not just conclusions. The idea that the 2016 EU Global Strategy, for reasons well known, was not adopted, let alone adopted as a decision by the European Council, has prevented further decision-making and implementation by easier decision-making procedures down the line. And fourthly, secure member state support for the follow-up of conclusions and decisions by the Foreign Affairs Council and the European Council. It seems that at the moment, conclusions are presented and they may come back, if indeed current developments demand so. But more often than not, there is not a dynamic agenda which is followed up and basically reiterated action points being checked, basically. Final point, Lukáš, I know I have been too long, is on the issue of representation, with Sofagate and Borrell's fiasco in Moscow, of course, on everyone's mind. Here, the report makes a strong case for the coordinating role for the European Action Service itself. And the debacles of the last few weeks show that there is a need for such stronger coordination role still, in support, of course, of the protagonist, including on the issues of protocol, one could argue. But that I'm adding here, that is not in the report. Secondly, one can think about the deputization, which is now happening most visibly with the Finnish foreign minister in Ethiopia, Sudan. That's an idea of creating greater buy-in of member states, obviously. The idea that there are such core groups out there, like for the Minsk process or the Iran nuclear talks, it's obvious that you would expect our task force to recommend that in all such cases, the High Representative is included in such talks, and that these member states alone cannot represent the European Union in full. Finally, there should be a smarter use of EU special representatives, but I leave that point for later. That's it in really cursory terms, telegraphic, as I mentioned, Lukáš, but I've tried to do justice to the breadth and depth of the report. And I would very much encourage everyone interested in these issues to, of course, read it in full. Back to you.
Thank you, Stephen. You did it great. That was my encouragement, for recommendations, and knowing that your report is full of them. So don't worry about taking so much time. Christoph, would you like to jump in now with your comments? Just reminding to our participants that you can start posting your questions now. They can be visible from now on, and they will be used at the Q&A session. So please do it. You are encouraged. Christoph, yeah, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Lukasz, and hello to everyone. No, the intention was not to stepping at this stage. I think Stephen has done a marvelous job in providing a comprehensive and snapshot of what the report says. I think at this stage it's better to move on to the second report. We can have a conversation about further details of the report later on.
Great, it's clear. You will jump in later on during the discussion between the panelists. So, Bartłomiej, the floor is yours. Let's turn to the PISM report.
Thank you, Łukasz. First of all, I'm really honored to be in such a great panel with such great panelists. And let me focus on two topics regarding our reports, our objectives and key conclusions. Our main aim was to analyze changes in administrative personnel, so AD category, in 2011-2019. We tried to answer how EEAS observed auxiliary quantitative recruitment criteria, which are the presence of national diplomats, as well as geographic and gender balance. We also decided to compare staff evolution under two high representatives, Catherine Ashton and Federica Mogherini. In this case, we performed an extensive survey of individual nominations for selected top posts. We called main management posts for the purpose of the report. Importantly, we decided to work only on public data because we believed that we also have opportunity to check how transparent EEAS is with its staff changes. And now about conclusions, I would mention four. First one would be about the requirement for EEAS to ensure that at least 1/3 of AD staff comprise national diplomats and minimum 60% EU officials. Here, the service quickly approached the first target, but in fact surpassed it only in 2014, 18, and 19. And by the way, this is the only measurable EEAS recruitment criterion, and the rest is a little bit more complex to assess. Second conclusion regarding gender balance. Women remain visibly underrepresented in administrative staff, but their proportion was improving slowly. In 2012-19, women's share in AD staff increased from around 29% to almost 35%. In the management, gender balance improved as well, slowly, but at lower levels. Now, for third conclusion, which I would like to talk a little bit more, these are geographic imbalances. Going to the AD staff in general, in 2018, we could say that most national groups seemed to have relatively balanced representations, but there were exceptions, mainly Belgians, who remained most overrepresented nation in administrative personnel since 2011. On the other side, we have Germans and Poles as most underrepresented nations, if you leave aside, of course, the British nationals who were shrinking, whose number was shrinking because of Brexit. However, when we deep dived into specific levels of administrative staff, we found other manifestations of disproportions. So let me mention some of them. Firstly, even if we have a balanced share in AD staff, there could coexist a significant overrepresentation on specific levels. Here, the most notable example is Italy. In 2018, Italian nationals have quite balanced representation in AD staff, but they were strongly overrepresented in various management groups. And what is more, an extraordinary rise of the number of Italians took place during the term of Federica Mogherini, also Italian. So it raised questions about the real reasons for that boost. Second example of geographic imbalance, quality versus quantity of the posts. We saw that underrepresentation in AD staff may be compensated by nominations to key positions. And here, the best example are Germans. They are strongly underrepresented in AD staff, but they held many key posts in the headquarters, including the top roles in corporate board. They also had the highest number of nominations for heads of delegations in strategic partners and EU neighborhood. Finally, one of these propositions we identified was recurrence in appointments for nationals of certain member states to head of the same delegations. And this pattern is mainly visible when country of the appointee has close links with receiving country of origin. For example, 40% of the heads of delegations in Latin America in 2011-2019 were Spanish nationals. But also 10 countries, all of them long-standing EU members, had 2 or 3 nominations for the heads of the same delegations during that period. France had the record of 17 of such cases. Let me move now to the final remarks about data transparency. Why this is important? Because we believe that the openness of EEAS on data is very important to monitor disproportions and to show what could be the reasons. And we can say that availability of EEAS data on staff indeed improved, but there are important gaps. Firstly, the main source for information on AD staff are annual human resources reports by EEAS. But we need to admit that the latest version became blurry, so it was hard to include some of the most recent data into multi-year comparison. Secondly, we believe that there should be some standard to include recruitment statistic in these reports or in other cyclical publication, because this could show the actual interest of the member states in the offers, and could show more how this process looks like. And finally, what we are quite surprised, and we believe that EEAS should do more on transparency on its top management. There is no dedicated page with CVs of the managers in the headquarters, and we found out that majority of heads of delegations doesn't share any information on their career history. So when it comes to the main criterion for the appointment, which is merit, that would be great to have such a base to look who is at the top posts in the EEAS. That would be my final thought about the report. And now let me pass the voice to Ella, who will comment more about our findings. Thank you.
Ella, the floor is yours, please.
Okay. Thank you, Łukasz. Data presented by Bartek has a political implications for EEAS actions. To start with the context, when the negotiations on EEAS took place more than 10 years ago, the EU external service was dominated by the citizens of largest member states and Belgium. At that time, some MEPs from the countries that joined the EU in 2004 and later on unsuccessfully advocated for introduction of concrete employment rates to compensate for such geographical imbalances. At the end of the day, the principle of geographical balance was only broadly formulated in EEAS decision in 2010. Catherine Ashton promised to introduce some correction mechanism during EEAS review, but it did not happen. And 10 years later, we have some disproportions in staff at the level of EEAS. What is important, lack of measurable indicators gives a free hand for high rep and EEAS in terms of nominations. Simply, disproportions in staff are not forbidden, and EEAS can only do its best to ensure geographical balance. Why to buffer at all by this problem? I mean, the conclusions from PISM report are worrying because the goal of geographical balance was to build trust towards EEAS among member states, which are, after all, the major players in the field of EU foreign affairs. It would allow to take into account the various perspectives, and it would allow develop positions acceptable for all. It is highly important because the EU foreign policy is highly divisive for member states, and especially smaller and medium-sized countries fear having EU solutions adopted over their heads. In the EU, we have 27 different strategic cultures, 27 different threat perceptions, and military and diplomatic potentials are different. And the EEAS is the only glue for this mosaic. So lack of geographical balance, mainly in relation to management and bosses which decide about political directions, implies some risks. First risk is that the EEAS could undertake inadequate initiatives. The recent example was the visit of High Rep to Moscow. The decision was believed in the European Parliament to be influenced by Markus Ederer, head of EU delegation in Moscow, and the decision was undertaken against the opposition of small and medium-sized countries in Foreign Affairs Council, such as Baltic states or Poland, which are pretty knowledgeable about how Russian diplomacy performs. And at the end of the day, the fiasco of this visit discredited EEAS at the Russian front. Second risk relates to the fact that any geographical imbalances weaken the perception of EEAS as an honest broker for member states. And some facts highlighted by PISM report are illustrative in this respect. I mean, to give examples, the fact that tenures of Mogherini and Ashton led to high promotion of citizens from UK and Italy for high management staff, or the fact that the majority of heads of EU delegations in the eastern in the neighborhood, or in case of EU strategic partners, are Germans. Those facts does not contribute to build an image of EEAS as an objective player. Third, and finally, all this leads to distrust among member states, resulting in their increased control over EEAS action, what authors of CIEPS and CEPS report write about. At the end of the day, I mean, there are some difficulties in the organization of summits, or the adoption of EU positions is delayed. In light of these limitations, I think that a good way for current High Rep would be to ensure geographical balance at the level of departments which are dealing with strategic but divisive issues for member states, such as Russia, China, Turkey. And just to conclude shortly, I would like to paraphrase Federica Mogherini and say that diversity is what makes us strong if it is adequately taken into account. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ella, and all of you, our authors and analysts, for your contributions. Now let's turn to Ms. Martinez Carbonell, and that will be particularly interesting to hear your comments on two reports, and most of all, your comments on recommendation that we could hear. In your opinion, which one could be realistic to take into account in this institutional cycle? Also taking into account the current conference on the future of the European Union. So I'm very interested. We all very interested in your thoughts. So please, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Lucas, and thanks for the invite. Thanks to all of you. First of all, for taking such an interest in the EEAS and looking into us. It's always good to hear somebody else having a view of what you do or what you don't do, because it's good to see it with a bit of a distance. Obviously, in my role of Human Resources Director, I would like to focus more on the second report, but please allow me to make some comments also to the first report. I read them both. They are both so highly interesting, so I've read them with a lot of attention. I'll focus first on the self-doubt, self-assurance, and I'll make some general remarks, and then I'll be a bit more detailed on the PISM report. With regard to the first report, what struck me a bit was that the report is very balanced, it's very interesting. I could share most of the general ideas, because I'm a strong believer of a stronger role of the EEAS, and I could buy most of what you say. But what struck me was maybe too little reference to our delegations. And I find that if there is a place where the EEAS has stepped up to the mark, and as the feedback we get from member states and from countries around the world, is with the role of our delegations around the world, and have they been catalyzers of EU positions on the field. And I find that the report almost ignores them, and it is a pity, because I think they are the front line of our action as of any diplomatic service. Secondly, something else looking at that report is that obviously it's dated January this year, but I can understand why most of the changes that have been imposed on the EEAS and most diplomatic services over the last year haven't been yet duly accounted for. And what do I mean by this? I mean, it's not only that we had a new HRVP, a new geopolitical commission, so the first months you're kind of learning to live with it and to adapt, but then it's the whole impact, the acceleration of COVID, and particularly on the way the EEAS has worked, and that has pushed us to be more on the front line and more into taking initiatives and being more proactive. I give you some examples, and it's again a combination of a new HRVP and the acceleration of some trends by COVID, and issues like the change of priorities. We, as Stephen mentioned, diplomacy today is very different from what was before, and that has pushed us to work much more with the European Commission, because many of the frontline files of diplomacy, call it Green Deal, call it strategic autonomy, are very much at the heart of Commission competence. And I've seen, even from an HR perspective, how much our people have engaged further with the Commission over the last years, pushed by the need. So I do think that the context has also pushed the EEAS and the high rep to be more proactive. I could give you an example of the recent EU global sanctions regime and approval of the sanctions lists, where the high rep put the proposals on the table. I could also mention the non-paper, the work on Turkey that the EEAS and the Commission prepared recently for the European Council ahead of the visit, and then we leave it there. But I haven't been responsible for organization of FACs under the previous two high reps. We had always, for example, wanted this idea of letters by the high rep ahead of each FAC to foreign ministers to signal what were the priorities on the agenda. I think that is happening today. COREPER is much more engaged on the agendas of FAC, both pre-FAC and post-FAC. So there's much more also buying from member states and interest into the way the FAC is steering policy making. On interaction with the Commission, I think there has also been a big step change, and the kind of symbolic project has been the whole reaction to COVID, and in particular two cases. First, as some of you might remember, at the early stages of COVID a year ago, the EEAS coordinated the whole repatriation of 600,000 EU citizens across the globe in really close coordination with the Commission, with the civil protection mechanism, and at the service of member states. That was something that would have been unbelievable a few years ago. But then it was the whole reshaping of aid. I mean, Stephen was mentioning earlier, and the report points out about the need to be more flexible in the way we program our aid. All aid packages were reprogrammed in the extent of a few months under the Team Europe approach. And this was not just the EEAS, this was the EEAS and member states working together. And this is going to be the spirit that is going to remain in the future for the implementation of the new global instrument. So I think we have learned, pushed by the realities of COVID to work differently. And the report, for example, of Stephen and others mentions the famous 20% of Commission people, 20% of their work can also be done on EEAS tasks. Those barriers are blurring, and that the whole COVID context, Team Europe, those who were on the front line, they work regardless from whether they were Commission or EEAS. They all serve the purpose purpose of, making sure the delegation function on the ground, whether it was for repatriation, for reshaping of aid programs. So those are some of the comments on the general remarks on how the EEAS works. With regard to some concrete issues that referred on the first report to how the EEAS is managed, I would say that, as someone already mentioned, we are going through a new kind of participatory leadership process led by the new Secretary General, Stefano Zanino, where there's been for the last 3 months now a very intense process of consultation with staff, both in headquarters and delegation, and all the staff, senior management, which is now starting to bear some results, and where our Secretary General intends to do some stakeholder consultations, including with think tanks in the coming weeks. I think that's already a sign of change. Looking at, the report mentions the idea of these job fix or regular consultations with the high rep. I've seen a step change from the previous high reps, where there are much more policy discussions with the high rep, between the high rep and staff, than there were under the previous high reps, with the staff really participating on a regular basis, and including, the humble desk officer, which at the end of the day is the one that prepares the paper, attending all the key meetings. And that was kind of very exceptional for the last years, and it's now become a normal fact of life, as it should be. On some other more specific staff management issues in that report, the report mentions career paths. Yes, we have that. We should have career paths. Yes, we have career paths now. We have 4 career paths for people to know. We have set up a college to form people to become heads of administration of our delegations. We have a gender action plan that was presented on the 8th of March by our Secretary General to make sure that we meet the targets. We are working much more closer with this commission than we were with the previous commission, BGHR, on interinstitutional mobility. And there's a lot going on at the moment, including some shadow work from commission to EEAS of teams, where I still see with member states, we are also doing a bit better with some exchanges the other way around, staff from the EEAS serving some time in member states. Where I do see some challenges, and I notice is as HR director, is in the need for further cross-fertilization between the staff working, let's say, on the Charles Fries, and that whole Deputy Secretary General, start working on the more CSDP aspects of the House and the rest of the House. A lot has been done over the last years. Some people have moved across, but I think there's room for improvement there, because a few years ago you would ask someone in a geographic, what is CPCC? They've never heard of it, almost. But I think a lot has been done, but a lot more could be done there, and we are working on it. On the EEAS becoming more of a diplomatic service, we are working on it. We will now put some legal basis for our rotation decision, which is the legal basis for movements of people in and out of Brussels, where we will make the obligation to serve compulsory for all the EEAS staff. And I think it's important because part of the spirit of the council decision was that we draw resources from diplomatic service of member state, but we also became ourselves more acquainted with diplomatic skills. And this is still missing. And part of the problem is that many of our staff members have never served abroad. And I think we need to push that so people start thinking with a mentality of a diplomatic service. But again, the big dichotomy is how to ensure that on the one hand, we are lining up with the other diplomatic service, being very one ad hoc, because we also have the military structures with us. And in parallel, we also sink into this interinstitutional Brussels specific network and bubble. And I will leave it there in the comments to the first report. On the second report, something that has been raised in that report, but also I think in the other report, is what I call a bit the original sin. I mean, the EEAS came about with 2/3 of its staff coming from the Commission and the Council, and those people are there. We couldn't just get rid of them. And that type of population was predominantly male and predominantly of a certain age. So, you know, if I look at the senior grades, and I'm not talking senior management, I'm talking senior grades, people that could become managers. Grades like AD13 and AD12, I mean, I give you an example. Today, in AD12, you have 2 times as many males as females. At AD13, it's even worse. So, you know, and probably if you look at the composition of those staff groups, you would find that all member states are highly predominant. So we need to change. If you look at the more junior grades, the population is completely different. But obviously, we can't just kick out those people and get rid of them. We're going to do with what we have. Huh? So that's part of, and part of that original design was an overrepresentation of Belgian population, because we are based in Belgium, because Belgium is a very pro-European country, where basically any Belgian official has a very good knowledge of the EU institutions, so and a commitment to the European project. So, and not to mention some of our former UK colleagues who have changed passport and are now part of the Belgian quota. So that has only worsened the statistics for Belgium. Another comment that I could make is that, and that comes up in the report, is that compared to other institutions in Brussels, the underrepresentation of the EU13 in the EEAS is not worse than in other EU institutions. So there is a problem across the EU institutions of underrepresentation of the EU13. And this is something that has been raised also at the level of EPSO, no, with regard to competitions. There is a problem with competitions. And having attended some of these meetings in EPSO, you know, there is a problem with underrepresentation at the end of the competition when the results come out of some of these EU13. There is also a problem with, you know, little interest from the Nordic countries, from Germany, to participate in the competitions, and exaggerated interest from the Italians and Spanish to take part in the competitions. So, you know, there's where, again, you find some imbalances. Some of the examples and reference that you made, besides the one of Belgium, the situation of Germany, for example, which is a case in point. It is true that there are fewer Germans, and they're mostly in the very top posts. When it comes, for example, to German diplomats, and this I can't prove, but my personal impression is that they are very happy in their own German diplomats. So they will only move to the EEAS if they see the benefit of an interesting position. They won't go for any position. And because they have a very broad and very talented diplomatic service, when they compete, they're very hard competitors to beat. And that you have to admit, because, you know, as much as the EEAS Council decision mentions geographic and gender balance, it also says that appointments should be based on merit. And it is true that not all member states are, you know, have the same amount of very well prepared diplomats. When I look also at the figures, for example, I take the figures of the last rotation exercise, and, you know, we had 30 Italians applying for head of delegation posts, 19 Spanish and German, 17 French, and then the rest started to go down. So, okay, the more tickets you buy, I mean, the more people you put in for competition, the more chances are that you get it, because the process is very, very competitive. Other comments that came to my mind when it comes to explaining the data about why some member states are more represented than others is the EU sentiment in some member states. Some member states are very pro-European, such is the case of France, with a very strong EU tradition, or one could say the same for Ireland or Sweden, that, you know, they push their people and they perform pretty well. And then obviously it's been mentioned before, the social, historical and cultural links. When we publish positions to work on Latin America, perfect Spanish is a requirement, or very good Spanish, because everything happens in Spanish over there. And then obviously if you come from Spain or Portugal, you have an advantage. On the question of women, the competition is, and I mean, there are reference made across the report. The competition, I think there is a competition across all diplomatic services for the same group of talented women, because we're all trying to meet our targets, and that makes the pool very, very stretched. I would now like to make some reference, a bit more of data with regard to all the comments I've made up to now, and I'll give you some ideas for the future. I mean, the first challenge that he has mentioned several times here is to reach the 1/3 threshold. I mean, the situation today, which is a bit different to what the report refers, is that temporary agents amount to 38.6% of the AD equivalent staff in the EEAS. The distribution is uneven, and clearly member states prefer to apply for posts in delegations, to the point that member states represent 44% of the management positions in delegations, which is far above the 1/3, no matter how much you stretch the 1/3, 44% is quite a lot. So they have a clear preference for applying for those posts, and then they compete against each other, where they submit very, very less applications for posts in headquarters. With regards to the gender balance, today, if you take all staff considered, ADs and administrative staff, 48% of the total EEAS staff are female, but when you narrow it down to management positions, is around, in middle management is around almost 33%, and in senior management already 25%. But then there's another interesting data. There's one area where officials are overrepresented, which is middle management positions in headquarters. And that's the only category where we've almost reached the target of the high rep of 40% of female participation. If we look at middle management positions in headquarters, we are almost at 39% of female managers. Where if you look at the three other groups of management, senior positions in headquarters and senior and middle management position in delegations, where member states are overrepresented, the ratio of women is not even 1/3. So I think they're not even 30%. So I think there's another element that we need to consider there, that we're pushing all the EEAS women, but we need more female candidates from member states. With regards to the geographic balance, I mean, we have been, and over the last year and a half, since 2020, 2021, making a lot of effort to push up the representation. In 2021, the nationals from EU 13 countries representing 20% of the EU population, but 23% of the EEAS staff in headquarters and delegations. So there is a base of candidates there. And I would say we need to look at the pool of the potential future managers, which is deputy heads of division, desk officers, recruitment at young levels, where these countries, I think, have a lot of potential. Finally, I would like to maybe give you some hints and ideas for the future. I take with a lot of interest the recommendations with regard to data transparency, and we have the intention to start kind of scoring or recording the data with regard to applications to have also, for our own sake, a better management of where the problem lies and how to address it, to compare numbers of applications of different member states in different departments, also to see how the different senior management is addressing the issue. We see, as I said, a pool of potential at the level of the young recruits, the deputies, both with regard to EU 13 and female, because there the situation is much more even. And then obviously we are continuing to improve our selection process. We have made compulsory training on unconscious bias for all the panel members. We are the only institution that has recruitment processes open to member states. Member states participate in all our panels for senior management positions and for heads of delegation positions. So, and all our posts are opened, including a minority of posts that are left for internal candidates, including the member states diplomats who are already working with us, which are the deputy heads of division, and a number of positions in the rotation exercise, but just to facilitate, because otherwise we can't handle so many interviews and panels. So much more open than any other institution. And in that regard, I believe much more transparent. But obviously, because we're so dependent on this third of staff coming from member states, we can't, we have less margin of maneuver. A final comment, I do take note of your request with regard to data improvement. I would appreciate it more in writing if you can. What you mentioned about the blurry of some data in the last report, because I know there were some changes and we aimed them with the best intention. We thought it would clarify. If it hasn't been the case, happy to go back to the old model. We will be looking into recruitment statistics. And I also take good note of the suggestion to publish the CVs of the top management and the heads of delegation, which is something that the Commission does in a regular manner, but we haven't done it because it hasn't occurred to us. So not because there is any intention to hide anything, but I will pass the message and take it forward. And I think I'll leave it there.
Yes, thank you so much, Ms. Martinez Carbonell, for your so detailed, very interesting feedbacks and proposals, and also the prospects for the future. We really appreciate that you commented 2 reports. So thank you for that. Let's open the discussion. We have still around 15 minutes to go. So before giving the floor to the rest of our panelists, I would like to remind and encourage one more time our expert participants. We have 30 experts that can make their comments. The best would be to give some brief questions to our authors and to Ms. Martinez Carbonell. So please write down your question in the Q&A Zoom window, and maybe we'll start our discussion from Kristen Hill, because you didn't speak until now, and please comment the previous statements. Maybe you have some questions as well, because until now you had separated interventions, so now we need some discussions more, please. Thanks. The floor is yours, Chris.
Thank you very much, Lukasz. I was very grateful to the comments that have been made on the reports, which were very comprehensive. It was indeed quite comforting to hear that some of the recommendations have already led to a degree of implementation, with the help, so to speak, of the COVID situation. Just on the point of delegations, which you raised at the outset, I just had a very brief calculation with Steven, and indeed, delegations are covered by the report. We have 26 times, I think, mentioned the delegation with a full section on representation, which essentially covers the whole of delegations. One thing is clear in the report, and that is the acknowledgement that the delegations are certainly a success story of the External Action Service, both in terms of their coverage, but also in terms of their function on the ground. They represent the union, the face of the union on the ground, and interact actively with different stakeholders on the ground, from officials to civil society. One thing we emphasize as well is the degree to which delegation staff, and in particular the head of delegations, ought to be perhaps more involved, both in terms of meetings that EU officials have on the ground, something which is not necessarily happened systematically, but also in terms of involving them back at HQ level in terms of policy making. That's something that we try to emphasize in the report, the role of heads of delegation in policy making, and not only in terms of representation of the EU on the ground. That's one point I wanted perhaps to add. It was interesting indeed also to hear Belen mentioning the challenge still, at least that's the way I understood, in terms of inter-service mobility within the External Action Service. There it would appear that indeed this is something that we came across a number of times in terms of remarks and in terms of feedback on the functioning of the External Action Service, and given the very idea, the very raison d'etre of the External Action Service, which was to go beyond the traditional bipolarity of the EU's external action in institutional and administrative terms, it would be indeed highly recommended that inter-service mobility and more coherence, more interaction between the different services, CFSP, CSDP on the one hand, and the rest of the house would be increased. Hopefully, training programs will help in encouraging this inter-service mobility, but also developing the internal reflex of talking to everyone within the house and not necessarily within one's own silo or department. I'm afraid I don't have much more to say about staff issues at this point. And given the limited time that is left, I'd rather hear more questions from the other commentators. Lukasz?
Yeah, in fact, I have one general question waiting still for our participants' remarks or questions. I have one matching results of two reports. It appeared to me after the read, it's quite interesting to reflect on the problem, how precisely and in which way the actual appointment policy in the service, I mean internal and external, taking into account these reported national and gender imbalances, could hamper the EU real common strategic culture, or Joseph Borrell's so-called the whole of Europe approach to the world, and in general the EU global leading role for which advocate, in particular, the authors of the first report. So maybe that would be one general question I would like to ask you, and please, answering, you can also comment and ask other questions to the panelists as well. Who'd like to start? Bartek? Bartłomiej Znajek?
Okay, so maybe let me address the remarks by Director Martinez Carbonell regarding our remarks on the data transparency. We basically took on every possible document published by EEAS. I mean, human resource reports, activity reports, as well as documents prepared for the discharge procedure of European Parliament. So we aimed at getting all data and then have a full picture. The problem with the latest report, human resource report, is that although it looks clear, it looks nice, it shows many numbers, it was not useful for us because many figures were about percentage only, and you were not able to get numbers, which for us in our exercise were key information. So we had to stop on the report for 2018, where we had a full picture, and we could compare all years since inauguration of the EEAS. So for us, from the perspective of verifying the information, for us that was a step back in case of this human resource report. maybe for like a regular reader, it was clear, because this was rather about percentage, about comparison of the share, but not the numbers. And for us, numbers were really important.
All right, thank you, Bartek. Stephen, would you like to react? Would you like to jump into the discussion?
I see that Ella wanted to come in.
Ah, yeah, thanks. Ella, please.
Well, I have a question to Stephen and to Christoph, because I really liked your recommendations in your report. I found very useful insights in your report, but I was thinking about the recommendations related to deputization of high rep, because I theoretically agree that it would be really fine to have foreign ministers of member states working for high rep and group of countries, but then practically, I mean, how would you make a big because usually if it comes to core group of countries, those are big players, France, Germany, Italy. How would you make them invite high rep for such core groups? This is my first question. And then if it comes to deputization of high rep by particular foreign ministers, I mean, Sudan, Ethiopia, those are not controversial issues for member states. How do you go around how to deputize high rep in areas which are divisive for member states? The second issue to Belen is, if we assume that the problem is a huge discrepancies of diplomatic capacities of particular member states as a precondition in appointment policy. Is that a good idea to have European Diplomatic Academy? The idea which was floated in CEP's and CIEP's report, this would somehow equalize the rights of citizens of different member states, and it would have a very good socializing effect for people from different parts of Europe. I used to study in College of Europe, and I really appreciate this socializing effect when colleagues, for instance, from Denmark or Spain went to Belarus and seen the situation, how it looks like. So those are two issues which I would like to ask to my colleagues.
Very well, Ella, thank you so much. Because we are running out of time, so what I suggest to maybe gather also Stephen's possible commentary and question, and we'll let Belen in the end to react on them. All right, is that fine?
That's absolutely fine. I can be, again, telegraphic. I see that you're all frozen, so I'm not sure if you can hear me. Yes, okay.
Yeah, we can hear you very well.
First point on diversity. Well, diversity fosters representation, innovation of ideas, and of course, exchange of information in the end. So it's obvious that going back to the point that you raised, Lukasz, diversity should be encouraged, so as to lead to better customer service, so to speak, for the EU institutions. On Ella's points, well, how to operationalize deputization? Basically, now the Foreign Minister of Finland has just been asked, in the conversation of the Foreign Affairs Council, where I suppose he spoke out with great authority, to lend himself for further investigation and that special envoy role. But in a more systematic way, I suppose, the deputization of the HRVP could be considered, for example, by involving more senior EEAS and Commission officials. In fact, one of the recommendations of the report alludes to this Barnier formula, whereby the member states offer a mandate essentially to a special envoy who could then report back, of course, at certain intervals to the Foreign Affairs Council. So then there's different ways and flexible approaches basically to be found in this particular form of deputization. Christoph, perhaps you want to add something on this, or also on the last point?
Well, just perhaps a couple of elements. one is there's something tricky about deputization because of the hybrid character of the HRVP. So there's no easy way to deputize the HRVP in its multi-hatting function. So it's difficult to rely simply on a foreign minister. A foreign minister will not have cannot have the same function as the HRVP, because that would mean essentially giving a foreign minister some powers that would encroach on potentially Commission's attributions. So it is difficult to deputize really the HRVP unless we have recourse to an alternative type of formula, which is, as Stephen just mentioned, a sort of Barnier formula, whereby an individual would have the mandate given both by the Council and the Commission. In this respect, perhaps, and a sort of nuance to what I'm just saying, one should not forget about the potential role of the rotating presidency. The foreign minister of the rotating presidency hardly has any role left since the Lisbon Treaty. And there may be a possibility to have the foreign minister sort of more involved in the activities of the External Action Service and on behalf of the HRVP. Although, again, there are all sorts of legal issues there in terms of, deputizing the whole HRVP's function, entailing the ability of the person playing the role of deputy to have the mandate from the different stakeholders. On the European Academy, if I can just take the floor on
yes,
this.
please. Yes, please.
Indeed, we have talked about that quite at length during our activities, and there seems to be quite a lot already happening within the service. I mean, Belen would certainly be better placed to tell us a little bit more about that. But the idea indeed to socialize and build this sort of esprit de corps, which is still, from what we understand, lacking within the service, a diplomatic academy would certainly help. Also in terms of instilling the sort of skills which Belen underlined a little bit earlier, namely sort of diplomatic skills that some of the staff simply do not have in their own training, in their own background, and so that would be useful. I mean, Stephen mentioned protocol, but certainly that would be useful for future generations of diplomats to know a thing or two about protocol. And I could not subscribe more to what you're saying about the European, or about the College of Europe as an ideal model to emulate in terms of forming the future European diplomats.
Thank you, Christoph. Very interesting discussion. Let's turn to Belen. So that will be the last contribution of today's debate. Please, the floor is yours, Belen.
Okay, no, thanks. I'll stay brief because we are over time.
Please.
Well, apologies to Christoph. I did read the references to delegations in the report, but to me, they deserved even a separate chapter because, I mean, compared to what has been said of the EEAS in headquarters, the breadth and width of what they've been doing is very, very important. On the questions regarding just a small issue on the HR report, yes, it is true that we prefer the percentages because it makes it easier for the reader, but anyone who wants the numbers, that we have the numbers out of which we draw the percentages, so we would be happy to provide it on a bilateral basis for a kind of pedagogic product as the HR report. We find that the percentages are much more interesting for the non-cultivated reader. So please reach out to us if you need the figures. On the whole debate about skills, the diplomatic academy, and this, as the report very nicely writes down, to avoid additional structures or cost and draw on experiences of existing academies member states, the idea of a diplomatic academy has been put aside because what we have is a whole program of different types of training and learning for the different levels of the people that come to the EEAS. But please bear in mind that if a third of the staff has to come from member states, they have to come and go. So a diplomatic academy would not necessarily solve the problem. What we really need is to form those that come to the EEAS. And for that, we have trainings at a different level. I mean, when people come at the level of managers, we have mentorship programs, we have coaching, professional coaching for them. We have induction courses for heads of delegation. We have everything that they might need. But when people have at a different, I mean, younger levels, we have a whole diplomatic program. It's not a diplomatic academy, where we combine training. We reach out to the academies of the member states. And we also have these famous career paths, including the career path of a diplomat, the career path of a PA to an ambassador, where all these different trainings are integrated. And we find that that way of more ad hoc training is much more useful. As I said, to me, the problem of the geographical imbalances will be solved in a few years, because it's also a matter of generations. I mean, we see the younger generations coming from the EU13 very well prepared. And I'm telling you, they won't have any problem when they reach the seniority level to apply for management positions to get there, because we have made appointments recently and they're really people with a lot of potential. So it's just a matter of not just us, all the institutions in Brussels catching up with the process of the later membership of these member states. I have a lot of people from all member states retiring in the coming years. We'll liberate lots of places. That's what we have, a competition, a first ever EEAS competition running. And I'm sure that we will be particularly looking at gender and geographic balance, but we'll recruit people from those reserves listed in the competition. And I think I'll stop there, and I thank all of you for the very interesting discussion.
Thank you so much, Belen. Indeed, you said in the beginning that, and you thanked for the interest of the service. And I think that we passed our time and we could discuss 1 or 2 hours more about the challenges that the service is facing. And I think this is also linked to these demanding times that we are facing, why this interest is so huge. Thank you so much, all of you, for your participation. Thank you, authors, for your beautiful work. We had a reaction from the expert public that this report was very useful, and it was very interesting discussion. And what I said in the beginning, that this 10th anniversary of the service, I think represents a really unique occasion to upgrade the modus operandi of the service. And I think today's discussion, so many elements that we could hear, they are in this direction. So as I also mentioned, I hope that many these issues will be the object of the conference of the future of European Union. Thanks a lot one more time, Belen, for accepting our invitations, all of you for the discussion, and see you next time. Bye bye. Thank you for your interest. Thank you. Bye bye.
Goodbye.
Cześć.